Okay, welcome to Lesson 8. This is our final lesson, and we're talking today about Arthur Miller and the death of a salesman. Now, the story deals with the last 24 hours of the titular salesman's life, and in this 24 hours we see his daydreams, his private conversations, his past's kind of hopes and betrayals, and all that kind of commingling with the present drama and leading up to Willie's death. So before we talk about the play, let's talk about Arthur Miller. He was born Arthur Asher Miller in New York City, and he was born in 1915. He was the second generation in a family of Polish-Jewish immigrants to the United States. Arthur Miller developed many of his characters actually from his extended family, from his aunts, uncles, cousins, when he became a playwright. Miller describes the feeling that he had while growing up, that he was kind of opposite of his brother. So much like the Lomans in the family, he also had a brother, except he viewed him as kind of being in competition with his brother well into their adulthood. So it is unsurprising that actually brothers, or the theme of brothers at odds, is a frequent kind of theme in many of his plays, not just in this one. Now, Judaism influenced his beliefs heavily, at least this is what Miller himself thinks. It provided him with a strong moral and ethical center that was evident, in all of his later works. Despite the fact that he did see himself as an atheist. Now, he believed that his kind of liberal instincts and sympathies were actually rooted in his Jewish experience. Now, the Millers lived a comfortable life up until the Depression. When the Depression hit, their business dropped, and the Millers were forced to give up most of their comforts. So we see this also in the death of a salesman. This kind of nostalgia for the times where they were able to afford the nice box, a nice car, and all that. So this sense of dilapidation of their life or their actually economic status is kind of permeates this play. Now, in 1949, Death of a Salesman premiered at a theater in New York. Now, the enthusiastic reviews made it a kind of a must-see play of the season. It was directed by Miller's friend Elie Kazan, the same director who made Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. We'll talk about his influence on the play in just a second. But more importantly, as far as this franchise is concerned, 1938 saw the House on Un-American Activity, the HUAC, as the acronym or the acronym as it stands for, was set up. So the House wouldn't really become powerful until the 1950s. And a number of people in the theater, such as Miller's friend Elie Kazan, but also fellow playwright Clifford Odette, during the next few years would be questioned by the committee, and they would admit to having socialist sympathies. And also in acts of kind of public contrition, they would name names of other similar sympathizers. So the suggestion here was that they were in fact communists. Now remember that this is the time of the Red Scare, the height of the Cold War. Anyway, these sort of namings were seen as an act of betrayal by the other members of the theater and film community, especially when they led to those people becoming blacklisted. So being blacklisted, for example, as a writer meant that you couldn't sell screenplays, right? You couldn't work under your own name. So many of these screenwriters or playwrights, they went on to produce plays under pseudonyms. Now, Kazan and Miller's friendship actually fell apart for several years after Kazan took the stand in 1952 and named names as well. So this is something Miller couldn't forgive him for a long time. They eventually came back and collaborated on another play years later. But in 1953, Miller actually left his wife and two kids to marry Marilyn Monroe. And she was significant as far as this kind of the trials of the communists was concerned, because she used her stardom to shield Miller from the scares of the McCarthy era. Now, he responded to what was happening in the United States and what he saw as persecutions by writing one of his better-known plays, The Crucible, which drew a parallel between the Salem witch trials and the House Un-American Activity Committee, right? So the hunt for the communists. Still, he remains probably best known for Death of a Salesman, which combined both realism and impressionistic technique to champion a new kind of American theater. After the success of All My Sons, which is a play which he produced prior to Death of a Salesman, and you can return to the previous slide where we had the timeline of all the plays that Miller produced, Arthur Miller wanted to do something more risky. And his inspiration came after actually meeting his uncle, Manny Newman, who became the inspiration for Willy Loman, after the matinee performance of his play All My Sons. Now, Miller asked his uncle how he was doing, and instead of replying, Manny went straight into saying how well his sons were doing. So it was as if he was feeling the need to kind of build them up in competition against their successful playwright cousin, so Arthur Miller. Now, the fact that Manny did not even pause before, taking their conversation in kind of different directions, this sort of gave Miller the idea to write the play also without transitions, right, where the dialogue would flow from one scene to the next without any apparent breaks. So if we recall the way Tennessee Williams' play was structured, we had scenes, right, which were kind of clearly cut off from each other. Here we go from scene to scene, from present to flashbacks from the past seamlessly. What changes is the way characters treat the physical location of the stage. Okay, so the protagonist, right, is most certainly Willy Loman. He is the one who kind of sacrifices himself, although ultimately he does not change, right? And this is his tragedy. A character who fails to change within a play usually meets a tragic end. He's usually punished for this. Now, interestingly, Arthur Miller claims to have written this play during a 6-week period in 1948, so after the war, but the place itself was interesting because it was a sort of a shed that he built for himself in Connecticut. So Arthur Miller, much like kind of Biff and Willy Loman, he liked menial labor, and he liked carpentry, and liked working with his hands. So we see where those ideas came through. Now, the play was published in 1949. So we can deduce that it depicts the era of the late 1940s, right? So it was set in the present times as it was written in. And again, it's 24 hours between Monday and Tuesday night, and the setting is mostly in Willy Loman's house. We do have a few scenes which kind of break from that. So, for example, we go into the city of New York, but also we have a scene in Boston. Now, the play proved immensely popular and saw a continuous run for a very long time. So critics ask this question: why the universal appeal? What makes this play so popular? And some answer that, well, Miller combined, elements of this Greek tragedy with kind of elements of contemporary life. So what he did is he changed this tragic Greek hero into an everyman, and in fact made it a family. Right, so the play bases on everyday situations and very relatable themes for a contemporary audience. For example, we have the adulterous father, We have the marginalized mother. We have the wayward children. We have this family's battle to pay bills and make ends meet until the next month. We have the issue of unemployment, and we have the child's quest to kind of make their father proud. We have a sense of loss. We have felt but unexpressed love. This is a big one in Death of a Salesman. The characters seem incapable of expressing their affection through words. We have themes of guilt and shame, and importantly, self-reliance. Now, the play opens with a melody played on a flute. The instrument is obviously important as it returns with many important scenes of the play, so we can therefore deduce that it symbolizes something. So what could the flute symbolize? Well, firstly, the idea of a flute should bring to mind kind of this pastoral setting, and indeed, recall that Willie's father is. We're told that he actually played a flute. So the suggestion here is, whenever we hear this melody, is that this kind of pastoral dream and setting may have suited Willie's nature better than the harsh world of business that he chose. Now take a look at the description of what happens in the beginning, and you'll see that Miller pays a lot of attention to details that will allow us to orient ourselves as to how the stage should look and operate. For example, take a look at the description and see if the audience was supposed to see any sky here in this world. All right, so we most likely not, right? Miller wanted to create this sense of claustrophobia, as if the Loman's house, which once stood free, had been kind of snuck up on and suffocated by the surrounding apartment houses. Take a look at the bottom highlighted portion. We are told that the forestage has an important role to play. Right? It acts both as the backyard of the house as well as the area where we go inside Billy's mind, so to speak. Right? This is the place where all his imaginings and flashbacks occur. So keep reading after the highlighted section, and you'll see that the walls are supposed to be invisible. Right? They're not there, but the characters only act in the play as if they were there only during the present action. Right? But they walk right through the walls when we're dealing with the imagined portions of the play or the flashback sequence. So the physicality or the way the actors treat the stage changes with regards to whether we are in the present action or whether we are in a flashback. Now recall that this is something similar that Elie Kazan, the director, began to create with the playwright Tennessee Williams in The Streetcar Named Desire. Recall the scene where we looked through one of the walls, it became transparent or semi-transparent, and we could see out onto the street where a prostitute and a drunkard were fighting. Now here this idea it kind of flourished into something more significant, and it in fact kind of shaped the play all throughout. Take a look at the use of light also. For example, in this scene, we're told that a gas heater begins to glow through the kitchen wall near the stairs, a blue flame beneath the red coils. So we see the light being used in this production to direct and focus the audience's attention. Recall why the gas heater is so important to the story. We're told, and we'll come back to this idea, that Willie is said to have attempted suicide by breathing in the gas through a hose, a rubber hose. So whenever we see the gas heater, then we're kind of reminded of the inevitable ending that the play is gravitating towards. Now, Willy Loman. Well, most kind of critics smirk at the idea of having such a blatant, symbolic name with the character's last name, right? Loman, as in low man. He has fallen really low, and there's no lower to go. Miller, in fact, claims that he was inspired by Fritz Lang's The Testament of Dr. Mabuse, where a key character was called Lohman with an H. The name aside, we can certainly say that the qualities that Willie possesses. I mean, he's a hardworking, right, 63-year-old traveling salesman. So this is something certainly a man, in a sense, very much kind of tied to his times. Right? We don't really have this traveling salesman anymore. But more importantly is the question, what kind of values does he believe in? Well, we could probably start with this idea which he keeps repeating over and over to his sons, right? The most important thing, according to Willy Loman, is to be well liked. Now, this kind of stands in contrast to this Benjamin ideal. Recall I believe you were supposed to read this essay in previous classes in previous semesters. Benjamin Franklin's essay written in 1757 entitled "The Way to Wealth." And it kind of proposed this ideal of self-improvement coupled with hard work, which would lead a good man to prosperity. So we have that idea, right? This Benjamin idea. And then that's also juxtaposed with something that his brother, Uncle Ben, comes to signify as well. Horatio Alger's myth. So this idea that we can go from rags to riches very quickly and fairly easily. So we see that what Willy Loman values is wealth, right? He wants self-sufficiency, which he hopes that wealth will achieve him. He wants public recognition, right? So he wants status, and he wants personal fulfillment. So he sees wealth as means of getting all those three things. Now, is he successful? Well, in some sense, he lives by this kind of idea, fake it till you make it, right? He pretends to be more well-liked and more successful than he really is. Recall how he boasts, about his connections in Boston. Alternatively, he sees success, right around the corner for his sons, for example. So the important question is whether the family partakes in this illusion. We'll try to answer this question when discussing the remaining members of the family. But importantly, it seems that Willy Loman is kind of a fairly nice guy. He's amiable. He to some extent is able to has the qualities that would make one a successful salesman. So the question is, why is he so unsuccessful? Let's take a look at this scene. Willie goes to his job, or to his boss, right, Howard, to ask him if he can get an office job because he's too tired of driving. But he can't, get Howard to focus because the man is playing with a memo recorder. Now, the truth is that, Loman doesn't want to travel because he fails. Basically, he's unable to sell anything anymore. But what possible symbolism could we glimpse from a scene where his boss is too busy because he's playing with some sort of machine? The machine keeps intruding in the dialogue, if you notice. It seems more important again to Howard than Willie is, than an employee of many years. Importantly, if you also notice, or if you recall this scene, Willie doesn't know how to handle the machine itself, right? He kind of speeds up the tape. So this is a point that Miller is definitely trying to make about the character, and he's making it about Willie, not just in this scene, but all throughout the play. The times have changed. The economic situation in the post-war U.S. is a lot more competitive. It no longer suffices to be a smooth talker. Bosses like Howard, they want to cut costs and increase profits. But there's something that Willie doesn't seem to want to recognize, right? The fact that he is a man of a different era and unable to adapt to the new realities. Recall the scene where Willie goes out at night to plant his garden. Again, we could interpret this in at least two ways. One is that Willie refuses to recognize that he would be much more at home in, again, a pastoral setting. Recall that, this is one of the last things that actually his wife says about him, that he was so good with his hands. He's very good at building things. He's good at planting things. He'll build a porch. He wants to plant seeds in his garden. But his tragedy is that he reveres the job of a salesman, which he perhaps is not best suited for. And he considers this job to be the best job that one might have. Therefore, his kind of nocturnal attempt to grow carrots could suggest that he is either unconscious or unwilling to admit so much to himself that he would be much happier, basically, as a menial laborer. Alternatively, we could also see that Willie's night gardening could suggest shame, right? He's unable to provide food for his family, so at night when the neighbors can't see, he grows carrots. This brings us to the next character, Biff Loman. So the older son. He's 34 years old, and we learn that he just came back from the Midwest. So why did he come back? Well, Biff seems to realize that what his dad fails to realize, that he is much happier working outdoors. But at the same time, he feels the pressure to start a business primarily. Because this is what his father wants. So does he in fact buy into Willie Loman's kind of delusions of success, or does he play along to kind of his father's content? Well, initially he comes back for that very reason, to sustain his father's illusion. Right? Biff comes down to earth and kind of has a moment of realization and clear thinking when he goes to Bill Oliver to borrow money for him, to borrow money to start his own business, right? Biff realizes, when he's been kind of ignored for 6 hours, that this was entirely unrealistic, right? Nobody is going to give him money for free so that he can start a rival company, right? So he waited all day to see Oliver, and Oliver did not even recall who Biff was, which kind of suggests that his father might have inflated his sense of self-worth, right? And these people don't esteem Biff and Happy the way Willie does. So in revenge, what does Biff do? He slips into the office and he steals a fountain pen before running out. So why do you think he does this, besides out of anger and out of revenge? Why does he have this almost like kind of kleptomaniac tendency of stealing things? Recall this scene. This is a flashback to the high school days, and I'll just refer to this as the football scene. Biff and Happy are throwing footballs around the yard, while the neighbor's son, Bernard, wants to help Biff prepare for his math test, because he's warning him that if Biff doesn't study, that he might not pass, that he will be failed, and this is his last year before going off to college. But both Willie and Biff ignore this warning because they think that being well liked will be more than enough to kind of allow Biff to succeed in life. So at this point, Biff is very highly popular in his small world of high school. He's a star football player, and notice that his father's comments on the way he is built, right? He's not seeing the fact that his son is strong as an opportunity for him to become a good physical laborer, but instead he glorifies his son and compares him to Adonis. So with such an inflated ego, Biff begins to steal because he feels that everything should be his by right. He has this sense of entitlement, right? So what does he steal? He steals a football from the school. He steals lumber for the house. He steals a crate of balls from Bill Oliver, and then many years later, again, he steals a fountain pen. But also in the meantime, we know that he steals a suit, and he's arrested for it out in the Midwest. So how does Willie react to all this? Well, when his son was old or younger, he didn't scold him, right? Willie was desperate that Biff would succeed in life, so instead of punishing him, he condoned the thefts and made excuses, kind of neglecting to instill in his son the moral values that a parent should teach a child. Now, Biff is successful in high school as a football player, but he reaps no real benefits of that because he never goes to college. Now, recall Bernard's warning, right? It turns out to kind of foreshadow what happens later on. Biff flunks math. But he still, at that point, he still has a chance to go to college. All he needs to really do is to attend summer school. So nothing terrible really happened. Nothing unamendable happened. But Biff doesn't go to summer school. Now, why doesn't he? Now, initially, he did plan to retake the math course, and he wanted to fix things and go on to college. Remember the kind of sneakers with the college logo that he would wear to kind of prove this point. But he went after his father to Boston, and he found out something that he should have not. And so that the idea that his father is insincere, right? Biff catches Willie with a mistress, so the woman from Boston, and this changes everything, right? Biff's self-confidence dissipates because he loses his respect for his father, and his father was the one who maintained his kind of high opinion of himself. But when he stops believing in his father and his father's words and his honesty, then he obviously no longer can kind of believe that he is Hercules, that he is Adonis. Right, so upon returning home from Boston, young Biff burns his college logo sneakers. So what does this mean? What does this gesture signify? Well, most obviously, and that he's not going to go to summer school and thus college. But on a deeper level, what he's really doing, this is a pretty violent act of burning sneakers. It's almost as if he's deciding to punish his father by being a failure, right? So afterwards, he leaves home, he travels job to job, he's unable to maintain any position for a long time because of his upbringing, he's unable to kind of take orders, and he, as I've mentioned, even does time for stealing a suit. But still, away from the influence of his father, Biff begins to recognize his own true nature, and he replaces his father's dream with one of his own. He sees the fact that he is strong and able-bodied, and that he should be a kind of a worker on a ranch, for example. Recall that he keeps saying to Happy that men built like us should work out in the open. Biff recognizes that he would be happier, again, working on a ranch rather than a business, even though in his father's eyes this would be a major regression. So what about his brother? What about Happy or Harold? He's 2 years younger. He's 32 years old, and this character was actually based on Miller's cousin Abby Newman, who had a reputation with the ladies. Miller created Harold Lohman, and he called him Happy because Biff's younger brother kind of invokes this happy-go-lucky personality. However, we soon learn that his happiness is diluted. So recall this scene when two brothers are reunited in their childhood bedroom, and they have a heart-to-heart talk. Right? Happy admits, "I don't know what the hell I'm working for." Right? So he admits that he doesn't see the point in everything that he does. He still feels lonely despite the items that he possesses, despite the women that he woos. So why doesn't he go out west with Biff? I mean, he admits that he would like to work with his brother. Well, it seems that he does believe in his father's dream, that being a salesman is the only worthwhile pastime. Now we know that Biff has been affected by his father kind of mythologizing tendencies, right? We've talked about that. He developed a sense of entitlement to the point where he began stealing things. But what about Happy? How is he affected by this upbringing? Well, we know he's a womanizer, right? So in a sense, it's a similar sense of entitlement, but also shows his need to win his father's approval and to raise his own sense of worth. Recall what Happy is doing during the football flashback, which we have discussed, right? He's literally kind of begging for his father's attention like a small child would. But as you see in this dialogue with his mother, Linda, she is not fooled by his courting. She recognizes it as an addiction and rather than an attempt to kind of settle down and make her happy. But does Happy change the way the way Biff does towards the end of the play? Does Happy reject his father's illusions? Well, recall the scene from the Requiems, so the part at Willie's funeral. Here are the lines that Biff says, or Happy says. We see that he does not reach the same level of awareness as Biff. He is determined to live his life as his father, having learned really nothing of what that means. And it comes out even in his words. He uses kind of aggressive language. He says, I'm going to beat the racket. I'm not licked that easily. I'm going to win it. So he sees life as a fight rather than an opportunity for happiness. He is embittered by his father's failure. So we know that Linda can see right through her son's vanities, but what about her husband? Is she deluded about Willy Loman, about his greatness? Take a look at this dialogue. She insists that attention must be paid to Willie and his suffering. Right, so she recognizes first, and she seems to be one of the few characters, or at least the only family member who sees this clearly, that Willie is first and foremost a human being, and it is a terrible thing that is happening to him. Right, dreams, illusions, and kind of self-deceptions feed the action of the play. And Linda, in contrast, she seems very much planted in reality. Right. She's concerned over house payments, mending work, insurance premiums, and her husband's care as well. Now, Linda's central importance seems to be as a voice of protest and outrage against what is happening to her husband. There are numerous more examples of how this idea is presented. For example, when she's mending her stockings, because she knows that in reality they cannot afford to buy new ones. And she continues to mend them despite Willie's insistence that, stop this, we'll buy you new ones. Note that the stockings hold a symbolic value as well. Now recall who Willy Loman gives stockings to as a present in one of the flashbacks, right? It's the woman from Boston. So they are a reminder of his infidelity. They remind Loman of the fact that he was able to give stockings to his mistress but not to his wife. And there's a sense of guilt in that. So Linda seems to be aware of this as well. And this brings us to an important second question. Take a look at this scene. It's the morning after the opening, and Linda, instead of getting Willie to come to face with the fact that their sons won't get a handout, for free from Oliver, and that their dreams of starting a business are in fact an illusion, she instead allows her family dreams to flourish, and she even encourages them. When Willie has to go to Charlie and borrow $50. This is another example, a week, and then pretend to Linda that it's his pay. She plays along, but we know from, for example, page 42, that she's very much aware of what Willie is doing. Right? She asks, "How long can this go on? How long?" Right? So she's aware of Willie's efforts at maintaining the illusion. So why does she help with this? Why doesn't she confront her husband and get him to face reality? Well, maybe it's out of fear. There's her husband's accident for a start, right? Which she tells her son about, and moreover, she tells her son that the insurance company doesn't think that it was an accident. And then there's the rubber hose and the gas heater, right? Take a look at the dialogue. Linda says it plainly. She knows Willie is trying to kill himself. So perhaps she doesn't want to upset her husband, knowing his suicidal tendencies. She's afraid that if she confronts him, he might hurt himself. And this is why she feeds into his delusions. But on the other hand, the delusions are bound to implode. So this is a very short-term strategy and an effective one. This seems to be her tragedy. She's unable to change her sons, and she's unable to change her husband. On the next page, what you see here, she goes on to ask, how can I mention it to him? And she's referring to the rubber pipe. Every day I go down and take that little rubber pipe, but when he comes home, I put it back where it is. How can I insult him that way? So you see, she is struggling with herself, right? But every time when the time for confrontation comes, she kind of chickens out. But still, we see that Linda not only loves Willie, right, through these lines and others as well. We see that she admires him and that she's willing to suffer through his humiliations, affairs, and belittling. This is something that Biff has absolutely zero tolerance for. Remember that he always tries to defend his mother. But she's willing to kind of take all that, and she's even willing to throw her sons out of the house to protect Willie. In a sense, in that sense, she's the most courageous and toughest character in the play. She's the one that keeps the Loman family together. And in the end, only Biff shows potential to be like her. All the other characters in the family, are tragic, or the remaining two. So one of the play's important themes is the kind of distortion, or maybe even deprivation, of the American dream. So remember that the original idea was that everyone in America, through hard work and education, could secure for themselves a life in the middle class. But this is not what the character of Uncle Ben stands for. Remember this Willie's brother who comes back in the flashbacks. Now recall this scene. First of all, note what Uncle Ben says about himself and the way he had achieved his fortune. He didn't attain, first off, middle class status, right? He got a lot more. He says he walked into the jungle, and a few years later he walked out rich. So the dream for which he stands is of wealth, not of middle class happiness or just being content. And what's worse, it seems that all he had to do is walk into the jungle to become rich, right? It's as if he found diamonds or gold or something. So it seems that all that is required is courage, right, and risk-taking, but not hard work, right? The wealth that he attains is not through self-improvement or hard work, so this is not the Benjamin Franklin ideal. So if you see this, there's kind of two ways that the dream, that American dream, is being mutated. First off, it's not about middle class, it's about wealth. And the wealth really is important because it signifies status. And B, what has changed is that this wealth, this high status, which is now the goal, is not attained through hard work and self-improvement, but through risk-taking, and it seems fairly simple. It's almost like playing the lottery. Now, let's return to the motif from the very beginning of the play, that of the flute. Now, we know that Willie's father played such an instrument, but moreover, we're also told that he made such instruments and that he sold them. So this is another way that kind of Miller sees American society changing, right? Willie Loman does not produce the things that he sells. And this is kind of saying that capitalism is no longer about production and selling of goods. It is about cutting costs. It's about increasing profits. It's about, just the act of selling. So we've lost at least half of what was important in the economic structure. So ask yourself, for example, this, is it at all important what Willie is selling his entire life? Do these products matter? I mean, we know that they don't. They're just a means of making money. But in contrast to his father must have put his heart into producing the instruments that he sold. So we see that this is a major change that Miller is noticing. Now, the characters that stand, kind of for the opposite of idea from Uncle Ben are Charlie and his son Bernard. Now recall that Bernard wanted to help Biff study for the math test, right, in the past flashback. He himself, through hard work, became a lawyer. So Bernard became a lawyer, and in this dialogue scene, we see, this is written in the description, Willie's shock, pain, and happiness at learning that Bernard, who Willie thought wouldn't achieve much because the boy wasn't well liked, right? We see that Bernard is now going to present a case in front of the Supreme Court. In other words, he has reached as high as it is possible for a lawyer in the U.S., right? There's nothing above the Supreme Court. So this is important contrast to Willie's worldview, because it shows that Miller's play is not an attack on American values, but rather it is kind of an exploration of the betrayal of those values and the cost of this in human terms. Now, we know how the story ends. Willie goes out and commits suicide, but what is his primary motivation for doing so? Is it just the fact that he is tired of fighting? Well, we know that it isn't, right? He wants to secure the future for his family, so he commits suicide in hopes of collecting insurance. So, what's kind of the symbolic level of this? In a sense, Billy's final attempt at selling, right, in that attempt, he is the product, right? He's trying to sell his death to the insurance company so that his family can collect the money and have a secure future. So in this vision, the human being is commodified, meaning turned into the product themselves. So we see this as the kind of final stage of this deprivation of the American dream. This is what it leads to. This is what Miller is warning us of. Still, not all is bleak for America, and only the city here is presented as the jungle, but as you recall, Willie's father found success in Alaska, Willie's brother Ben became rich somewhere in the jungle. We see that Miller has this tendency to kind of think of the frontier as a place of possibilities, kind of the way Biff does. So there is still some purity and some good parts of the U.S. And this is an idea I think that runs through much of these narratives. Recall that this is something similar that is suggested in The Great Gatsby. Now that we've talked about the delusions of grandeur, right, that Willie makes for himself, and also the mythologizing language that he uses when comparing Biff and Happy to Adonis and Hercules, as well as talking about how such an upbringing affects the boys, let's move on to the final question. If we think about Loman's final sell, as being successful, then it is likely that his sons will have the financial kind of currency to start their business together, right, and start their sports store and working together in the city. But this is the final question. Do you think that this is going to happen? Do you think that Willie's death was in vain, or was it not, right? In other words, do you believe that the insurance company will come through and give the Lomans the insurance money?